back to the channel, guys. This is Jock with the accent of me. And of course, I couldn't keep putting these videos out without giving you guys what it really is. And by the title of the video, you've already noticed that this is about the life of living of an expat. I personally don't like this word for a number of reasons before we get into it, because I think that it's a phrase that has been coined, expat. And I am a big advocate of telling people that ask me, how's life living as an expat? And I was like, how's life living as an immigrant? And today, it's one of those things where I tell people this: are you tired of like that same old routine, dreaming of living abroad? This video today is going to be for you guys. And we're going to actually explore exciting realities of living in another country, or what most would call expat life, from the blissful moments to the challenging ones that may make you want to go back home. So I always tell people that it's very important to not just look at these things as glamorous. You know, I think a lot of people look at these situations, they look at living in another country. It's been, I would say it's over glamorized a little bit. If you ask me, it's been over glamorized. And a lot of times people don't want to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly, you know? So for me, I always go with how I can embrace this life, you know? So I want to tell you guys about, first, personal anecdotes about like the initial excitement and the reasons that I personally moved abroad. So I've left out of America now, this will be my 6th year. I remember it was at the time of like George Floyd, and for me, I was so like hypersensitive to everything that was taking place. Super hypersensitive. Everything was kind of bothering me. I think the States just wasn't for me at that time. And I remember telling myself, like, there has to be something different. And I'm a firm believer, if you know me personally, I'm a firm believer of something has to be better. And I can't fully take on everyone's initial thoughts about something. I'm never a person that'll say, if you say don't do this, I'm gonna be like, well, let me just check it out. Let me see for myself. Let me see if you're telling the truth, because I believe a lot of people do project their fears onto you. And I remember living in Atlanta. I was living in Atlanta at that time, and I remember one day I just woke up and I was like, I'm moving. Like, and my friends were like, what? I was like, I don't know what it is. I just have to see for myself. I have to see if there's something different for myself. I felt sort of crazy, if that made sense. Like, I felt crazy being in a country that they didn't really love you, and it was a constant issues with the police officers, constant issues with the government. And I'm like, not that I can't get ahead, I was just tired of running the rat race. So I remember one of my cousins, hopefully he doesn't see this video, one of my cousins reached out to me, literally called me and was like, hey, we should take a trip together. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. You know, I'm down. You know, and at this point, I had traveled a lot in my life. So it was nothing for me to look up a flight and book the flight. So I remember I was in a dark place at that time. I booked a flight to London, literally booked it. And I remember he never responded to my message. Like, I texted him like, hey, I booked a flight. I did this, I did that. You know, let me know what's up. Let's do it. He never returned my message. And I remember being at a crossroads with myself and telling myself, it's either one or two things that's going to happen. You're going to go by yourself, or you're going to cancel this trip. And unfortunately, I had booked the economy ticket that I couldn't refund. So I ended up going by myself, loving it. Fast forward, I think I moved to London, did my process, moved to London within 8 months. Moved to London, originally Brighton. Then I moved to London, stayed in London for maybe 2 years, and that's where I moved to. Next thing is I was in a relationship, and I moved to Barcelona, Spain. And that was kind of the whole appeal for me. That one was a little bit different because the culture was different, the language was different. I didn't speak another language at that time. Fortunately, I do now. And I think that was like the first, like, boom in my face moment where I was just like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? But there was a freedom that I got in Barcelona that I didn't receive in England. And being when I was in London, it felt much more like America. And I'll be honest, and I've never said this, but I love the fact that I didn't speak the language in Spain. I love that I didn't speak Spanish. I love that I was oblivious to what was going on for like the first time in my life. Everything was not like a blur, but it was a blur. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. I made friends that spoke English, but everything was a blur to me. I was like, I don't really care. I don't care to hear the outside noise. I literally just wanted to be in my little cocoon. After being there a few years, I moved to Mexico City, CDMX, and that's where my life changed. I had a couple of years of speaking Spanish at that time, even though it was completely different when I moved here. It was a different feeling. I no longer had to protest my blackness. You know, I was looked at as more, I didn't like it at first, the stairs, but I learned that it was more of an appreciation of beauty. And I've had multiple people in this country tell me I'm beautiful and they love me and things like that. And I've been treated like one of their own in the streets, in the mercados, in restaurants and things like that. And that was for me, was exploring my freedoms and the growth opportunities that came with living outside of my comfort zone, So with that being said, it was a theme that just helped me grow into this man that I am today, that made me uber confident. Even when I didn't know Spanish fully, some days I still kind of mess up. But this experience in Mexico City, or just living abroad and having to step outside of myself, was probably the best thing I've ever done, if I had to be honest. It was probably the best thing that I've had to ever do. I think Mexico for me, like if you talk about like when you're navigating the unknown, that's a lot of the questions that a lot of people give me all the time. Like, Jock, like there's cultural differences, there are challenges, there's language barriers. How, or how do you fix that? Or how do you really really put yourself into this culture? And I said, you know what, for me, the initial culture shock for me was the fact that I didn't have to protest my blackness. That was crazy to me. I was like, oh, I'm black, but it's like, I can go into stores. I can go in stores with my backpack. I can walk around. Nobody's going to look at me weird. And even if they do, I probably don't even know it, So it was a level of freedom in that. That was my initial culture shock, was just how nice everyone was, how pleasing, everyone was, but how they weren't trying to kiss your ass, And I would tell a lot of people here in Mexico, because they love African American culture, and I love that they love, who we are. But I remember a lot of times telling them, this is your country. You speak Spanish. I should be the one that has to adjust. Don't make me adjust to you. Don't adjust to me. Let me adjust to you. Sorry. And I think it was a telltale of like, it was so important to have like an open mind and being able to adjust and adapt to the new environment and how things are done. And, I was used to people picking my trash up and not me taking my trash out to the street, and even how you go about certain things are only cash, and it will always be that way. And I was like, oh man, I'm used to only using card, and how can I do this? And another one was, not all the time, but Mexico is naturally a loud city, but I think there was a joy in me discovering like the different customs, traditions, and like the way that I saw things from the Muxes, which is like a group that is in Oaxaca that predates like pre-Aztec times, where they had trans people that identified as no sex while we're fighting in America about different things, or the Day of the Dead, El Dia de Muertos, and how it was more of a celebration, or seeing people's altars at that time. I think those were the things that made me feel this was the right choice. This was always the right choice. And I think at a lot of times I was shut off because I think I was hurt. I was very scarred, and I resented the world for a moment of being black. So there was a lot of initial loneliness on my journey of living in different countries or being an expat. I was always being away from my family, my support system, but I spoke to my family every day. We talked every day. We loved on each other every day. And sometimes I can go to I was closer now. So I could get there very fast, if I needed to. And I would always say stepping outside of my comfort zone, from going to UNAM or El Chopo, Chapultepec, the museums, the shows. And a lot of times I was a naturally shy guy. So even in English, I made friends, but I was more about a person like when the vibe came, whoever came into my circle, that's who was my friends. And I think that was a telltale for me, because a lot of people didn't understand it. They didn't understand, like, oh, how could you be lonely? Everything looks so amazing. You're in another country and things like that. And I would always tell them, like, you're not here, And I think as I start stepping outside of myself, it was easier to find like-minded individuals, and I found a sense of belonging in this city. And I was a little scared of it also. After living in Barcelona, I made so many friends in Barcelona. I was kind of scared to do this all over again in another city. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And then, I think explaining to people that there were some unexpected realities, balancing joy and hardships, because there was a lot of high and lows in this process, or in this whole time that I've been doing this. It was, I remember falling off of the gym, not really showing myself a lot of care, because I was out like eating tacos and chilaquiles, and I was like, whatever, I don't care. And even I know you guys some people have seen my brace journey, getting my braces here, and there were a lot of adjustments that I had to go through. The altitude, learning how to breathe in this altitude, and just telling myself that there were a lot of things that I could do, but I just had to find myself again. And I think that was always I would say that was the challenge most of the time, is saying, not only am I doing this, but I'm finding a new version of myself whilst doing this as well. So I think that was one of the things that, once I got a trainer, once I got a nutritionist, start eating better, taking care of myself, it all sort of just molded into one big, fun, happy experience. And then I remember telling myself I would never let myself go again. So that's kind of the gist of how this actually works, and I want you guys to know that you can do it. It's not something that's absolutely difficult. It's not something that I would say is ever something that you shouldn't try. I think it's worth it. 100% think it's worth it. So definitely leave a comment down below if you've lived in another country. How do you feel about the expat versus the immigrant thing? And I get it, but I just think it's a respect thing. If we're going to say they're immigrants, I think we should say that we're immigrants as well. But drop a comment below. Thank you guys as well for always joining, always supporting. Nos vemos pronto. Adiós.